Hey, it's James from 4x4 Earth, and welcome to episode 29 of the 4x4 Earth podcast, the history of the Canning stock route with Phil Bianchi.
Join James from 4x4earth.com as he learns all there is to know about four-wheel driving, camping, fishing, and getting out and exploring our great country on the 4x4 Earth podcast.
Hey everyone, welcome back. Happy New Year. Super excited to be doing a podcast. It's been a little while since we've done a 4x4 Earth podcast. I apologise for that. We're going to make a big effort to try and pump out a few more this year. And I am super excited to kick off in such a really good way. We are interviewing Phil Bianchi, who is literally the guy who wrote the book on the Canning stock route. That's right. He wrote a book about the Canning stock route. He's written a lot of books, a lot about the Canning stock route. He's done it multiple times. A great four-wheel driver, a great historian. I can't think of anyone perfect to talk about one of the iconic tracks through Australia. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the history. We've got a few podcasts that we've done with him. We're going to talk about the history. We're going to talk about some of the access issues with it. And then we're going to finish off with his advice on the best ways of travelling the Canning stock route. Because it's not for the faint-hearted. It's not for the newbie. You do need to do a little bit of planning. So, without further ado, let's get into the Canning stock route. And this is the history of the Canning stock route with Phil Bianchi. So, Phil, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Oh, it's a pleasure. I've been looking forward to this. This is going to be a really interesting podcast. Now, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and why it's going to be such an interesting podcast?
Well, I hope it is. Yeah, I'm retired and I'm a very keen four-wheel driver, and I'm in the fortunate position of being able to mix the history of the deserts and the bush with the four-wheel driving. I'm actually a historian. I've written a number of books, about 10 or so, and quite a number on the Canning stock route, with the main one in particular being work completed canning. And I enjoy nothing better than to be able to go somewhere and it all comes flooding back as to what happened and the murders or what happened in a particular spot. I do a lot of cross-country four-wheel driving. Got to get all the permits and that, and I'm also a four-wheel drive journalist. I've written articles for various national magazines, and I've got a column in the West Australian magazine at the moment. So, yeah, I suppose I like histo four-wheel driving, if there's such a thing.
Excellent. And that's one of my big things, is that the four-wheel driving is often just the way that you get out there. And the good thing about four-wheel driving is you're going places that other people can't get to. You're often going to places that, haven't been visited before or a very long time, which is exciting. So, some important questions to start off with. What four-wheel drive do you drive?
I drive a 2006 turbo diesel 100 series, and it's, I've got it all set up and it suits my needs. People say to me, well, why did you buy that? It's big, solid, reliable. It's got the brilliant 24-valve turbo motor, and it goes all day. And I've been all through the deserts and cross-country stuff for 2 and 3 weeks at a time, and it's never let me down. Toyota.
Now, what mods have you done to it?
Yeah, right. It's almost like go to ARB and say, here's the keys. Not quite.
What mods haven't you done?
Yeah, well, basically, my setup is based on remote desert travel, where trackless country, travelling with Aboriginal elders and fellow historians and various ologists, geologists, zoologists and whatever, for up to 2 and 3 weeks at a time. So it's set up along those lines. So, roof rack, long-range fuel tank, dual-wheel carrier. I've got an air-on-board air conditioning compressor for pumping up tyres, TPMS system, that the heavy-duty job that's clamped onto each wheel, not the little valve stem ones.
Yep.
Got all the usual bar work and whatever, diff locks, bash plates, UHF, HF, radios, EPIRB, draw system, winch, triple batteries, heat exchanger for having a shower, very important if you take the bride along.
Yep.
Because it makes them happier. And I've even made up because it's an independent front suspension, I've made these little mud flaps which sit in front to protect the CEV boots. So I've got all sorts of things that suit what I need, including a little table where I sit my Toughbook laptop, which I use for navigation.
What software do you run on that?
I use Aussie Explorer.
Yep.
And I've got a system where a mate of mine put it on, and I can open up to 4 maps at one time using the single GPS, which makes life very interesting. Well, very interesting from the point of view that you can jump across the geo maps and other maps, so you can check the terrain of where you are, and I'll read the terrain so that I can predict we're coming out of a mulga belt, or if we skirt around this in this particular colour of the geo map, we can dodge the mulga belt. It's just things I've learnt over the years, and then you go back to your ordinary map, and been doing it for 15 years, so there's a lot of experience in the Aussie Explorer front, and 25 years with four-wheel driving.
Wow, that's excellent.
Yeah.
So, mud, snow, sand, or rock, which is your favourite type of driving?
Well, I was young once, so mud was probably there, but not anymore. But if we have to go through mud to get to a place or in the cross country, well, it's there and we cross. But probably sand and rock, which covers the dunes and the deserts and the breakaways and the various types of country out there. So, and I've got the tyres accordingly.
Now, what's the best track and why?
Well, I suppose I'm going to be biased here and say the Canning stock route. As I said, I've done all sorts of stuff, Amberdell, Connie, Great Central and Hunt Oil Road and all sorts of, the Gib and all that. But the Canning stock route, being 1,800 kilometres long, the climate changes from one end to the other. You can be in lovely sunshine at the northern end, shorts and T-shirt, and by the time you get down the southern end, say you're in June, you've got jumpers on and there could be frost in the morning. So it changes that much over that distance, and the conditions vary from year to year. This year seems to be a good wet, so it's going to be very green and lots of flowers. But I've been on it, and there's been a drought, and the trees, in an effort to survive, have been popping their own leaves off to reduce the amount of transpiration. So, and then there's the history. There's just so much history with the Canning, and since I had that book printed, work completed Canning, I've probably got another 100 pages of new information history that keeps coming in and or updating. And then there's so many challenges out there. As I said, you've got the varying conditions of summer, of rain and no rain. Then there's the dunes. Some of the dunes around midday, they're just huge, like 30 metres high. And the challenge of getting over them, and for me, just being there, like nothing better than wake up in the morning and grab a cup of coffee and wander off to the top of the nearest sand dune and just take it in and look out and watch the people back at the camp crawling out of swags and that. It's just a wonderful spot to be in. Yeah.
So what's the hairiest moment four-wheel driving that you've ever had, and what did you learn from it?
Well, you're right. We were bogged for 3 nights in one spot. And how this happened, and I learnt from this very well. We woke up in the morning, beautiful, sunny, that desert blue sky. You get not a cloud in sight, desert blue sky. We 2 couples, we got a steady breakfast, packed up, drove off. And about an hour, could see this huge black cloud heading towards us. It was really strange. It was quite big and dark, lightning coming out of it. We thought, what's going on here? And the next minute, the rain just torrential. The wipers couldn't keep up. It's just like driving in a waterfall. And within about 40 minutes, we were completely bogged down to the floor pan. Couldn't believe it. And we couldn't move. And my mate was about 30 metres away. He was stuck. I was stuck. There was about 6 inches of water running past us the whole time, like we were stuck in this big lake. And So we just sat in our cars and thought, well, what are we going to do now? And then eventually we struggled out and had a bit of a chat and decided to report to VKS. I don't know if you've heard of them. They're the HF radio people. And we reported to them that we'd been caught by this rain-bearing depression, and we were bogged just west of Riddle River National Park on a little track. And they said, well, can you report to us again this evening and then again each morning and evening? So we started to do that, and the rain just never stopped all that day, all that night, until about lunchtime the next day. Just rained and rained and rained. And then we got out and started to use our max tracks. We put them on the mud, and we used them as like planks to walk around around my car. We set my car up as the cooking station or whatever. And the water subsided, but it was still mucky and boggy. And we just sat out another day, and then we contacted VKS, and they said, you're the only people left stranded. The police are insisting that you be taken out. They're not prepared to leave you there, and they want the Telfer mine helicopter to come down and pick you up. Cool, we weren't too happy about leaving everything in the desert. We had plenty of food, and of course there was water everywhere, but it's pretty mucky, but we had plenty of water. And we said, oh, well, it's drying out. And they said, well, contact us this evening and we'll make a decision then. And we tried to contact that night, and we couldn't, probably just as well, because of that atmospheric. And the next morning, we managed to get the cars out the previous evening. They were sitting up on the ground, they're still all muddy. And the next morning, we just drove out. Couldn't believe it. On the fourth day, what was completely boggy like custard, we just drove out. The water just drained away. We had about a kilometre of this crappy country to get out of, and got back onto the more solid track, if they could describe that. And we gradually got out onto the Talawana and made contact with VKS and thanked them all very much, and slowly went home. Wouldn't want that to happen again.
That's quite a story, isn't it? So 4 days in total?
The fourth day, yes.
Yep.
Yes, 3 nights, all sleeping in the car, of course.
Yep.
And you can't lay the seats back because it's all full of stuff, all fridges and everything is just set up for. Anyhow, we're still alive. Interesting. We've got some interesting photos, but you couldn't take the photos I really wanted because the camera would have got soaked.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's probably the hairiest moment, yes, because it took so long to sort out.
Wow. So, onto the Canning stock route. What exactly is the Canning stock route?
West Australia had a gold rush going on since about the late 80s. They found gold at Halls Creek, but when they found the gold in the eastern goldfields later on, that's Kalgoorlie, Boulder, Leonora, Laverton area, the population quadrupled in Western Australia. Doesn't sound like much, but it went from about 30 to 40,000 to 120,000 plus. And the state wasn't prepared. The infrastructure wasn't prepared in the state, and the people wanted meat. And so they decided to build a stock route to get the cattle down from the Kimberley to Wiluna and then feed it through the rail network at Wiluna to the gold mining town. So that's the whole idea of starting it up. They couldn't bring them around by ship because of these cattle had some tick which would survive the journey and might get into the southern flocks. And they worked out that if they went across the desert, the ticks would die. And so Canning was called in. He was a surveyor who surveyed the rabbit-proof fence, our long fence over here. And within 2 years, he was surveying the Canning stock route. And then he was put in charge of building it. Finished that in 1910, and the first mob of cattle came down, the first successful mob came down in 1911. There were 3 mobs trying to come down that year, and only 2 made it down. One only got about a third of the way down, and the drivers were killed. So
they were killed?
Yes, they killed by Aboriginal people in the area. And no one really knows what happened. Did these guys... Well, one of the drivers was an ex-police trooper Was he too rough with the people? Did he interfere with the people or the women, or did he? Nobody knows. All they know is that about when the second mob came through, in charge of a bloke called Tom Cole, he found the bodies and stuff strewn everywhere, and it took him nearly 2 months to get to Wiluna. It takes roughly 3 months to get a mob of cattle down. He reported it to the police down there, and they then started sorting out what to do about it. So that was the second and third mob. And probably since then, there's been about 39 mobs come down. But I keep coming across records of more or hints or from various, because people feed me a lot of stuff, but 39 mobs came down. So if you can imagine spending today multi-millions of dollars, because that's what it would have cost, and only 39 mobs of cattle. So, to me, it was a white elephant driven by the rich cattle barons using the government's money to try and get their own cattle to market free of charge.
Wow. What's the distance of the stock route, do you know?
The distance of the stock route, if you drive the current wheel pad, is just over 1,800 kilometres, choosing the shortest points. Because you've got options up around the Breeden Hills, and just to the south of that, you can take the shortcut across and not go out to, say, well 46, which might be 20 or 30 kilometres out to the west. And so if you don't do that, you save yourself like 60 k's going out there and back. So it's about 1,800, the shortest route, and about 18. Most people say about 1,860 or 1,880 would be a safer. But if you were the cattle, or you were like that lady called Gaynor Schumann, she walked the Canning, and she tried to walk the Canning in the way that the cattle went. It was only 1,600 kilometres. So there's more than 200, 250 extra kilometres if you take the vehicle route.
Yep.
Many a person has said to me, well, why is that? Well, the first successful vehicle expedition to do the whole Canning were 3 government surveyors in 1968, Dudley, Winehouse and Keeley, and they had their own personal little Land Rovers, Len Bedell-style ones. They didn't have a lot of power to go charging up big sand dunes. So they would come to a dune system, drive along it until they found a low point, drive over the top, then drive back along the dune to roughly where they met it, and then keep on going. And so this backwards and forwards is what adds all the extra distance to the Canning stock route. And,
So the first mob that went through, or one of the early mobs that got through, were murdered by Aboriginals. What was the relationship like then with the Aboriginal communities at the time?
Well, it's hard to know, because we've got to remember that that's how history was back then, because I'm about to say something that people might find palatable. When the people in Perth and around the state heard about the murders of the 2 white men and the Aboriginal chap was murdered because he was out of his own country. So as far as they were concerned, he's a foreigner as well. The government said, we've got to do something about this. So they got hold of a chap called Sergeant Pilmer, and they asked him to go up and catch them and sort out what had happened. And he did. He went up there towards the end of 1911, and he writes in his diary that he dispersed them, which means he shot them. He would have probably shot out the whole tribe, 12 to 16 people. Nobody really knows exactly how many people. And because it's a desert, there weren't big numbers in any one area. They could only be supported by the amount of water and the amount of food that was around. So he would have probably killed all the people in that particular patch. And that didn't augur well for future relations and trust with drovers coming down. But it was probably the last time any white fellas were killed or any black fellas were killed that were droving. But in 1922, there were some oil geologists running around looking for oil-bearing areas, and they were way off the stock route, about 30 miles out towards the east. and in the night they were attacked by Aboriginal folk, and one of them was dead by the time they got him back to the well where the main group was still waiting, and his name was, oh God, the name escapes me. It's terrible, isn't it? Anyhow, he died there, and we don't know if any Aborigines died because there's no record of them having done anything about it. That was another death or murder, and he's buried near the Liberal Well.
Okay.
Yeah. There's a chapter in the book on deaths and murders on the Canning stock route, and there's a whole series of others of near the stock route of interfering with the women, and probably the important thing is, as I said earlier, there's not a lot of water out there, and these tribes fiercely protect their water, and then along come these white fellas with 300 or 400 cattle, going to drink everything out, and then they've got these camels that just siphon the water, and it's gone. So if there's a clay pan or rock hole, they take a lot of water out. And and then when the time of the wells came, some of the wells the Aboriginal people say were built in sacred areas, like the particular well there might have been some spiritual significance to it, and Canning or the white fellas unwittingly just sunk a well there. And that upset the Aboriginal people no end. And, so even John Forrest, he was attacked in 1870 around 1876, around well 9. And so much so that he built a stone fort to protect himself from the attacks. And anthropologists nowadays are saying that he unwittingly probably stumbled across Aboriginal ceremony time, and he hung around for about 2 weeks at this one spot, and he wouldn't leave, and the camels were drinking the water, and they were getting upset. So they had these attacks, and it's a misunderstanding, mistrust, not being aware of the significance of each other's needs and property. We're only starting now to learn that the Aboriginal people see country not as a desert. It's actually their spiritual, it's their religion, it's everything to them. And of course, unwittingly, if we come across and drive tracks all over the place and destroy their art and that, they can get pretty upset, and fair enough too. Yes.
I imagine communication would have been pretty difficult because how many times was there that there was a common language between them? Either the Aboriginals able to speak English or...
Oh, they gradually learnt to speak English, but they had, if you apply for permits to do the canning nowadays, there's 3 main native title groups that are involved, and they, between them, have had language areas. They might have had similar common words. They might have their own local language. So, you don't need to do 150 Ks and you might find another language. And gradually they learnt to, I guess, as they assimilated with the white man and learnt the language. And Canning tried to name the wells after what he phonetically thought the Aboriginal people were calling a well. And the idea of that was that the driver coming through would say, "Can you tell me where Liberal Well is?" And the Aborigine hopefully would understand his attempt at trying to say the name, rather than say, "Can you tell me where Well 36 is?" Well, he wouldn't have a chance then, because the Aborigine wouldn't know. He wouldn't know that it was called Well 36. There were some attempts, but I'm not really an expert on the Aboriginal side of things. I wish I knew much more, but a lot of the records are confidential for all sorts of reasons, and I wasn't able to get access to them. I'm sure there's, in many cases, an entirely different and competing story in relation to some of the events of attacks and murders and why they wanted to fill in certain wells. A lot of the drovers would come down and find the Aborigines had tried to fill it in. And presumably we now realise that maybe it was because of the spiritual significance and the spirits were disturbed or whatever the similar type of reason was. And so I guess we were the wee white fellas in the early days are blundering around like bulls in a china shop, not realising what we were trampling on and doing.
Mm. So these records, are these like West Australian government records or Aboriginal records or?
They're West Australian government records, and they're kept in the State Records Office of Western Australia, which is just like a giant library but for government files. And you can find the names of records and say, oh, gee, that sounds like an interesting file. I'll have a look at that because it talks about Thompson and Shoesmith or something. And you go to apply and they say, sorry, it's classified because it may be revealing Aboriginal names or confidential information. I don't know why. There's reasons why. And there's native title applications still going on, and some of this stuff helps native title. And I guess they didn't want to give ammunition to anybody that's against it. I really don't know, but when they say, sorry, classified, that's it. You know,
wow, that's amazing, because, like, this happened, we're talking about things that have happened, you know, around 100 years ago, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. There was a Royal Commission set up. Canning travelled the desert. It wasn't called the Canning Stock Route then.
Yep.
He travelled the desert in 1906, and it took him till the end of 1907 to get back to Wiluna, and it was called the Wiluna-Kimberley Stock Route Expedition. And by the way, on the way back, one of the men, Michael Tobin, was speared, and he died. And at the moment the Aboriginal chap threw the spear, Tobin fired his gun, and they both died.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that's just part of the history of the Canning. And so anyhow, they got back to Perth, and the cook, Edward Blake, was wanting to go on the expedition to go back up and build the wells. And Canning and Trotman said, I'm sorry, no, you're too cantankerous, and we're not going to invite you along. And he got upset big time, and then he started levelling all these accusations about the men interfering with Aboriginal women and chaining them up so they wouldn't run away, and stealing their sacred objects, and a series of things like that, desecrating their sacred water places. And then there started to be a lot of press and a lot of anger in the city, and so the government called the Royal Commission, and it was a very speedy thing. It was all over in about 10 days, and all sorts of people like John Forrest and other explorers were called to give information and advice, whether they chained Aborigines up and what have you. And the Royal Commission found that Canning was given the job to do, and that was to see if it was feasible to find a stock route. He did find a stock route. He achieved that, and they claimed they didn't find any evidence of stealing sacred objects and all the rest of it, and they exonerated Canning and Trotman, and Canning with his 2IC Trotman were then put in charge of building the wells, and they had to assemble teams and go off and build the wells. Well, this Edward Blake, he wouldn't give it up, which makes me think, to me, there's something in it. You know, there must have been interference and whatever. But Edward Blake, even nearly 20 years later, was still trying to get investigations, and every time there was a change of government over here, he tried to get the new government to go back and investigate what happened, because he reckoned it was a whitewash. I've never been able to see those files, Aboriginal matters, and that's it. And that's all I know of the incident. I'm sure there's miles of correspondence and letters saying, you know, we're not, I'm presuming this, we're not going to reopen this because it'll open a can of worms that'll look bad for the government. I don't know what they did, but they wouldn't let me see the documentation. So there were tricks going on 120 years ago.
Wow. I just find that amazing, because it makes you wonder what actually was happening, that there would be files that are locked up for so long. One would have thought that, yeah. I mean, everyone involved has been long gone.
Yes. There is in copyright land, you're not supposed to be able to use anyone's work without their permission for 50 years after they've died.
Yep.
right? So if one of these people lived to the 1960s, obviously you couldn't touch any of their stuff. I mean, that's just how it is, and we just deal with it. I've got a lot of friends who are anthropologists and archaeologists and geologists, and the archaeologists and the anthropologists seem to have access to these files, providing they've got a direct reason, and it's something to do with the Aboriginal matters related to the area, like a native title or whatever else. Maybe they're trying to find some sort of songline or spiritual thing. To just waltz up and ask for the file, you'll be met with a no.
Wow.
That's fine. That's how it is. That's how it is. I just hope that one day we can get their story, because I think it'll be an amazing story, the stuff that they could tell us.
Absolutely.
And I'll give you an idea. 2-3 years ago, we were following, a group of us, white fellas, were following David Carnegie's route from 1897 from Halls Creek down towards Leonora. And we got permission from a bunch of Aboriginal elders based in Warburton, and they met us at the edge of their country, which is about a third of the way down from Kirikara. Do you know where Kirikara is? It's northwest of Alice Springs.
Okay, yep.
And we went cross-country for over 2 weeks with these Aboriginal people. There's 4 elders and about 8 or 9 guides and what do they call them, rangers. And they were cleaning out all the rock holes. And at one point, one of my mates, he read Carnegie's diary for the day, the journal entry. He said, we got to this hill and we called it Red Bluff or whatever they called it. And he says, it's strange. We keep seeing Aboriginal smokes off in the distance, but we can't see any Aboriginal people. There's just none around. And then he finished reading the journal, and this other bloke gets up, Desmond Newberry, and he's the Aboriginal elder whose family came from the area that we were in, and he had not been to that area himself, ever. But as soon as we got to the spot, he knew what it was from the stories that his parents had told. And he says, I know why there were no Aboriginal people there. And he says, it now makes sense. I heard the stories that the old people were terrified that these big monsters came into the area. And, of course, there was the blokes riding on camels. But they didn't know that. The best way they could describe it was this big god, and he was so big and tall, and he made funny noises. That's the camel chortling and carrying on.
Yeah.
And then he separated. The god became 2 when the bloke got off the camel. And to Mr. Newberry, it now all made sense what the people were on about, because he knew from the actual incident knew from the journal of Carnegie. A wonderful little story. And I got a lot of enjoyment out of talking to the old men. They tell you so much stuff. Anyhow, I digress from the Canning.
Well, so do you want to go through a little bit of the history after it was actually created? So once,
Sure.
They'd started to put some of the people through, start running the mobs of cattle through, what sort of interesting things happened after that?
Well, I told you about the Royal Commission. I told you, well, as the drovers came down, the Canning didn't remain in working order for very long. Wells fell in, there were fires that burnt the infrastructure, and the thing caved in, and they couldn't get into water until the next well, and all sorts of things like that happened. And by about 1928, it was almost impossible to bring cattle down. So a lot more pressure went on from the northern cattle barons, and the government decided to spend money and refurbish all the wells, and they chose an old fella called William Snell. He was a well-known bushman and in the area, and he had a team of people, and away he went. He refurbished the wells, and he got us about 2/3 of the way up, and the massive heat of summer struck, and they were pushed back, and they were going to finish the wells the next season. And in the layover period, the government decided they weren't happy with Snell's work. Reports had come through, but there's not a lot of information as to why they weren't happy. But some of the comments were that they didn't restore the wells to proper 6 foot by 4 foot conditions as per government specification. So would you believe it, went and asked this old fella called Alfred Canning, who was now 70 years of age, and said, would you be prepared to lead a party to go and refurbish your wells? And he said, yeah, sure. So off he went at 70 years of age, and in 1930-31 he refurbished the Canning stock group from one end to the other. And it's reported he walked the whole way, because it takes a while to refurbish a well, and he would just putter around and he walked the whole way. And he came back to Perth, and he was interviewed by our local newspaper, and the newspaper man was asking all these questions, and then Canning's wife said, Canning's wife said, I must tell you something. And Canning looked at his wife and said, what? She said, well, your men told me that you walked the whole way, that you didn't get on the camel. And he said, look, I don't want you to write that. I was sent out there to do a job. I did my job, and that's the end of it. That was Canning. Yes, and so that was a refurbishment then, and then they used the stock route for a little while, and it fell into disrepair again. Then along comes World War II, and the Japanese had started to attack Darwin and Broome and Wyndham and the bombings and whatever, and the government started to get worried that if the Japanese managed to land in the Kimberley, they would have all this food, the cattle. So they quickly refurbished the Canning stock route to run the cattle out of the Kimberley, and I presume also it's an escape route for the people to get out, because the shipping routes were being bombed and they couldn't get out the other way. By the time they finished refurbishing the Canning stock route, the Japanese threat was over, and the Canning stock route was ready to go again, and it was heavily used until almost every single year, sometimes 2 or 3 lots a year, until 1959. The last lot came down in 1959. And during the 50s, we had lots of government geologists and surveyors running around doing various surveys and checking, and that's how and Len Bedell was part of that in the 1960s, building the Talawanda track across the Windy Corner, the Gary Junction Road, which ended up going right through to, which became the Kidson track and went right through to 80 Mile Beach. They're all Len Bedell roads, and they all cut across the Canning. And then more and more people started to get involved or get interested, and tours started to happen. And probably my first run was at about the mid-1990s, and still very few people travelled it then. We were required to report to the police station in Halls Creek that we were leaving, and then report to the police station in Wiluna that we had arrived. That was in the mid-1990s. And now you can just about need traffic lights at some of the wells. There's that many people.
What an interesting story. A royal commission, cattle barons, murders, all sorts of interesting things. And Phil's done a great job of documenting all of those things that have gone on. So thanks, Phil. A great chat, and we're going to be back with the next episode. We're going to look further at some of the history of the Canning stock route after it was built, and we're also going to be looking at some of the access issues that you can have in the Canning stock route.
4x4earth.com is used by over 200,000 people every month to find great tracks, organise trips, and find out how to better enjoy exploring the great outdoors. There's over 1,000 tracks and 300 campsites ready for you to explore. So check out 4x4earth.com today and sign up to get access to the track information, ask questions, and meet other 4x4 Earthers. Membership is completely free. If you're looking for a good route, check out 4x4earth.com today.